Dear friends, on behalf of the family and myself, I'd like to thank everyone for being here today to honor the memory of Inder Malhotra, friend, colleague, and father. I won't waste your time by itemizing all his accomplishments, because some of you in the audience have known him for longer than I've been alive. What I would like to say is that he was a great father and a role model who taught by example. It is no secret that he aspired for a strong, independent and prosperous India built on secular and democratic principles, a country in which every citizen has an equal voice. Therefore, the best way for me to continue his legacy is to stress these values in my personal and professional life. I end with a quote from Rumi that seems particularly befitting. It goes, "I closed my mouth and spoke to you in 100 silent ways." Thank you. I would now like to request Mr. Nihal Singh, if you'd like to say a few words.
I'd like to let you in on a secret. This was in the 1950s, mid to late 1950s. Inder and I were colleagues of the Statesman, and we had formed a special group on paper, which included not only writing journalists, but also the circulation manager of that time, and the head of the engineering section, Viren Chabra, who is here in a wheelchair to pay his own tribute to Inder's memory. I think what was remarkable about the group was the bonding of all of us, in which occasionally we included the then British news editor of the Statesman in Delhi, Philip Crosland. And the bonding was such that no major event in the life of any of its members would be recognized as legitimate until the group gave its blessings. And I do remember now that Viren Chabra's marriage was blessed by the group, as was my introduction of my future wife to the group. And the bonding was such that we, after a time, we went our separate ways. I've been abroad at that time for a long spell. Inder went to Calcutta, and then he went to the Times of India in Bombay. But our bonding remained till the very end. And Inder and I exchanged at least once a week he was very much interested, as you know, in the political life, especially what was happening in India. And since we were both members of the Saturday Club, which meant every week in India International Center, over lunch and a speaker with questions and answers. And he would ask me every week, he said, who was it who spoke? And what did he say? And of course we had a wide variety of people speaking, including recently Sitaram Yechuri and several experts in their own fields. But Inder was alive to the very end in finding out what did he say and what happened. And he used to ask me about other developments in the Indian political field. I would like to say how bonded we were and what a precious memory it has been for me and other members of the group. I wish to condole Inder's passing away with Anil and other members of the family, and I wish to remember Inder as a man who excelled in his own field of work and is remembered accordingly. Thank you.
May I now request Ambassador Shankar Bajpai to come and say a few words, please.
Anil, other members of the family and dear friends, one prefers on occasions like this to celebrate the life rather than mourn the passing. But I must confess to you, I really cannot let the moment pass without the mourning. How can we not but regret that he is no longer with us? I, for one, particularly regret that I should survive him when I expected him to see me off. And how can one not be sorry that with his mind as active as it was till the end, his body let him down? Until that very last 2 months when he had to go to hospital, we used to talk at least 3 or 4 times a week on the telephone. I couldn't climb his stairs and he couldn't move out. But we had over the years, and we go back a long time, it was 1956, it is already 60 years that we first met. Over those years we had become used to, whenever I was in Delhi, or he was, we used to meet at least once or twice a week. Delhi was a very small place in those days. Nihal mentioned bonding of little groups. There were, as the senior members of the time, like Kuldeep and others will remember, there was the group of the media, which of course meant the press at that time, apart from Nihal and Kuldeep, who were already heading for seniority. There were even more senior people like Inder's guru and mentor, Prem Bhatia. There was good old Shri Gurgaonkar occasionally, Girilal Jain, and others in the younger space was G.K. Reddy and Krishan Bhatia and others. But beyond the media group, there was a bunch of us in the Foreign Service and in other parts of government. There was Lavraj Kumar and his wife Dharma. There was the greatest of all our economists and therefore the most forgotten, V.K. Ramaswamy. And there were people in our own service, Ravi Tandon, Eric and Alfred Gonzalez, Krishna Daskotra, sometimes more senior. I could go on, S.K. Singh and the Gonzalez brothers. We used to meet at least once a week. And yes, we gossiped. But it was, if you might say, serious gossip. We had our illusions because we had hopes. The one thing we all were talking about all those times is, when is India going to take its rightful place in the world? This is what is due to us, this is what we must get. Why aren't we doing it? And each of us had our own complaints and faults to find, but the stimulus was there and the friendship was there. And the greatest thing of all was that although Inder was just beginning his career, he had already earned the respect of senior people in government. And he managed to get far more information than even we in government could ever get from our seniors. And most important of all, he never embarrassed a source, and he never embarrassed willingly or deliberately government. If government was embarrassed because it had done something foolish, that was its fault, not his. One of the things he never forgave me, although I tried hard to persuade him I was not guilty. Shankar, We were together at Tashkent. I was the secretary of the delegation. You didn't tell me we were going to sign. I must confess to you, to the last minute, I didn't think we were going to commit that folly, but so I did no means, I never quite believed me. Anyway, we used to talk. He was still working on ideas for a book. He was urging me to write one myself. And so we were talking till the time he went to hospital. And all these years, the one thing I always felt the rest of the community, his own and the rest of us, would remember him for, or respect him for, was his sheer professionalism. As I say, he never let you down. More than that, he realized the responsibilities of his profession. There's some doubt as to whether the three estates didn't originally refer to something else, but they have come in modern times to mean the three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. But the fourth estate is rightly so called because although it may have no constitutional position, it is at least as powerful in the influence that it can exercise in shaping our lives and our country's future. And Inder never forgot that opportunity, that duty carries responsibility. I can only hope that his example will be respected and followed by the younger media personnel. But I don't think Inder would have liked to be remembered as a role model. I think he'd like to be remembered for his personal relationships. So let us remember him as a very, very dear friend and a very, very great human being. Thank you.
And now request Mrs. Meera Shankar, if she'd like to say a few words.
Anil, members of the family of Inder Malhotra, and friends who are gathered here to mourn his passing away. Let me say that Inder was that very rare combination of being both a peerless chronicler of his times as well as a gentleman. We've often heard the phrase, an officer and a gentleman, but rarely have we heard the phrase, a journalist and a gentleman. And I think this is something which characterized him and in a sense distinguished him from many of the younger lot of journalists that we see today. He avoided throughout his career the twin traps of cynicism or a cocky know-it-allness and a feeling that only you have all the answers. As Shankar Bajpai said, he was always curious, right till he passed away, wanting to know the how, the where, and what happened. And he was always objective, letting the facts take the lead, not so much opinions. All this within his overall commitment to building a strong, democratic, prosperous, and inclusive India. And this was an age of idealism, in a sense, if you will, after we attained freedom. And it was a spirit which imbued not just the government, not just young people joining the government, but the entire country across the spectrum, whether it was the dacoits who gave up dacoity, whether it was, the giving up your land to those who were landless. There was a spirit of idealism which walked across the land, and it touched all those who were young at that time with its spirit. I got to know Inder when he was a neighbor of mine in Rabindranagar in the 80s. He loved a good drink or two in the evening. He loved a good gossip, and of course, he loved discussions on policy. So we hit it off like a house on fire and became firm friends since then. We talked almost every day or every second day, and I went to see him just before he went to hospital. As usual, there were the questions about foreign policy, about what was happening in the country, how did I read things, and his own book, which he was writing, his autobiography. And I think that would perhaps be the one regret that he had when he went, that he had not completed it. It was halfway or 3/4 of the way complete. I remember him above all for being an extremely decent human being, a loving husband, and in fact someone who looked after his wife in an exemplary fashion when she was ill towards the end of her life, when she couldn't breathe properly, had to stay at home. Inder stayed at home and nurtured her. There are not many men in India or elsewhere that I know who would have shown that kind of consideration, kindness, and love towards somebody who has been a part of your life and a companion. He was quintessentially modern in his outlook, never using what is quite common in India, the hierarchies of authority to put you down. Even though I was quite a junior officer, he always treated me as an equal, again a rare quality because we pass the nuances of hierarchies and power so finely in India that all relationships in a sense come to be infused with that hierarchical assessment of where you stand in the pecking order, and particularly where gender is concerned, perhaps you don't stand in the pecking order at all if you go by Manu. Inder was, as I said, a quintessentially modern mind, and he enjoyed the company of young people, enjoyed finding out about things, and that curiosity he retained to his end. And I end with a quote saying, tears are sometimes an inappropriate way to mark death. When a life has been lived completely honestly, completely successfully, or just completely, the correct response would be a smile. So let us celebrate today the extraordinary life of Inder Malhotra, a peerless journalist, a gentleman, and a friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Meera. May I now request Mr. Shekhar Gupta if he'd like to say a few words.
I think I could simply take the lead or pick up the threads where Meera left it. Meera, you called him a journalist and a gentleman. I think he was even better. He was even rarer. He was an editor and a gentleman. It's a tough thing to do. Most editors have a tough life in the sense that they have to take many decisions which don't make them popular with others. Frankly, having worked at the Express for such a long time, 25 years in 2 spells, I have had the pleasure of working with almost all members of the golden generation of Indian editors. Inder, surprisingly, was not among those. We had never worked together, not even for a day. Because he mostly stayed in the Times of Indian Statesman, where I never worked, but I have some memories of him from when I was a trainee in the Times of India for 6 weeks in 1977, at the peak of the 1976, at the peak of the emergency, but I didn't know him at all. But I did get to know him later on the circuit, as you call it. And my first real conversation with him, or the first occasion on which I grew great respect and appreciation for him, was at the house of a Singapore High Commissioner. And I can put a time frame to it. It must have been 1984, sometime after Operation Blue Star, when there were a lot of protests by Sikhs all over the world.
And the Singapore High Commissioner, in the manner that Singapore diplomats tend to be, said, how silly is your government? All these people keep coming and shouting slogans and doing things. Why don't you just open fire and kill 500 of them and then nobody will come out? And he said, in Singapore, they came out to protest. We put them all in buses and they said, where are we going? He said, you're not going to jail, you're going to the airport to be sent back to India. And all protests by Sikhs in Singapore died. You do something like that in India, why don't you do it? You're so stupid. And Inder Malhotra, who I hardly knew until then, I was sort of an outsider to the group, having been of a different generation, different seniority at that point, very different seniority. I was just a special correspondent. He said to the Singapore High Commissioner, whose name I shall not mention because he grew to fairly high level, he's still there in Singapore Foreign Service hierarchy. He said, High Commissioner, the city of Bombay is 8 times bigger than the city of Singapore. And it's growing 3 times as fast. So stop lecturing us. And temperature dropped to nothing because these are the kind of gatherings where usually people, these were still the pre-reform days of the cocktail circuit, when good liquor was only available in some places. And people compulsively laughed at all the bad jokes the diplomats in Delhi told you. And to me, Inder suddenly stood out as someone who was different. And I must say, since then we talked many times. I called him many times for advice. I have a fascination for the 60s. I don't know why. I always think that 60s was India's most important decade. 3 wars took place, 2 prime ministers died, Congress party split, all kinds of things happened. China tested the nuclear bomb. So I was fascinated by the 60s. And I had read about the 60s, not the least from Kuldeep Nayyar's books and V.N. Malik's books, but obviously I had not lived through the period, and I write from the top of my head, so I make mistakes. And I did make a mistake once. I got one identity wrong. That famous comment in Parliament on Nehru saying that not a blade of grass grows in Aksai Chin. And I thought I mentioned this in some article, and instead of Mahavir Tyagi, I said Nath Pai. Now this must be something that stuck to my mind from some discussions between my parents at my home in my childhood, but this is a mistake I made. And frankly, nobody caught it, because nobody knows what happened pre-Google right now. But Ram Guha caught it. And Ram Guha got so angry that he wrote an email to my colleagues on the editorial page saying, all of you get together and rid this newspaper, great newspaper, of this megalomaniac, namely me, who doesn't even know blah, blah, blah. And he sent me a mail also saying that, I'm telling you, don't write about this stuff that you don't know, because your mistakes will then be exposed to the cruel gaze of World Wide Web. So I had one of my colleagues write a one-line note to him asking if you could publish that letter. And he said, no, this is not for drawing salacious pleasure out of it. I was just cautioning you, etc., etc. So this ended. And I did mention to Inder once. And Inder said, anytime you write something about a period on which you may be a little uncertain, 60s, 70s, 80s, beyond 80s you know everything. Just call me or send it to me, I will validate it for you. And I must say there were so many times I called him, even after I had 3 or 4 young people fact check it with the help of Dr. Google. I would call him and always come back, not always with a correction, because fortunately there weren't many, but always with a story to tell me about something that I was saying. And with this Panditji said this, and then Shastriji said this. In fact, last time I called you was a few months back when I was writing something on this beef issue in terms of the glorification of vegetarianism, and I read some place, I spent some time in an RSS school at my childhood. It was the only school in the small town where I was brought up. And I do remember great glorification of Shastri as a vegetarian. So I called him and I said, Shastri was a vegetarian, he was a Kayast. So he said only he and his family was a vegetarian. So don't make the mistake of saying that he was a Kayast and not a vegetarian. He was a strict vegetarian. So much so that even when he went to Tashkent or he went to Moscow, pure vegetarian meals were arranged for him, but the rest of his family was non-vegetarian. So you could get your facts right to such an extent. my great regret is that he is gone when we had just gotten to know each other. There were some very tough moments when I did reach out to him. I shouldn't speak about everything, but editors have to make calls sometimes where you need someone senior, trustworthy, more experienced than you to talk to. Usually, Mira, you are right, we do think that we have all the answers, we are know-it-alls, we don't need to consult anybody. But there are times when you need to consult somebody. In my case, who would it be? Sometimes I'll walk across and talk to Mr. Nariman. Usually, if it's a legal issue, if a panga has to be taken, or if a panga has been taken with the courts, I would go and ask him. On editorial issues, 2 or 3 times, I sought his counsel. And only one I will mention. This was a particularly difficult story. In the first quarter, more or less, of in April 2012, many of you are editors and journalists, so you know what I'm talking about. It was a story that my reporters had, that I had confirmed. It was the kind of story that had never been done in Indian media, and hopefully will be done again in future if such a thing happens. People will not be shy of doing it. And I went to him, I didn't speak with him on the phone, and I said, Inder sir, isko chhap do? तो इसे इसमें डरने की बात क्या है, छाप दो? तो मैंने कहा गाली बहुत पड़ेगी. बोले गाली तो पड़ेगी, लेकिन गाली पड़ना तो काम है, छाप दो. So then I said, but there is another issue. 3 of my reporters have worked on it, and I have confirmed it for them. So I am responsible for what goes in anyway, not just legally, but even factually. So the question is, should I put my name to it, or should I not put my name to it? And he thought for a while, and he said, look, you don't have to put your name to it, because your reporters are senior enough. In fact, 2 of them are editors. But this is such a difficult story, and this will shock the system so much, and this will shock your peers and your seniors so much, that if it's just your reporters, no matter how senior they are, the establishment will fry them. So I said, sir, aap mujhe kyun marwa rahe ho? He said, no, put your name to it, maybe you are a bigger fish to fry. So I said, I'm not sure I'm too big a fish to fry, it doesn't matter. Risk your neck. And risk my neck I did, my delicate neck. I almost lost it, right? But to my great satisfaction, not only did the story go through, but we were vindicated, the story has been acknowledged, and we talked about it many times. And I must say, of all the seniors that I have met, and this applies to me also because I'm not a young person anymore. I'll be entering my 60th year in a couple of months. So even when I see other seniors of my generation, or a little bit maybe younger than me, talking to their juniors, I never find such an absence of hierarchy that I saw between Inder, and not just myself, but even trainees and fact checkers on my opinion pages. In fact, I tried very hard. I sent a couple of them to him occasionally. In fact, I offered to send them frequently to get him to compile the writings he had done for the Express in a book. He was a little bit lazy, I must say, about it. He also wasn't very well. I tried very hard to get him to finish his memoir. And he kept on saying he was such a perfectionist. Main karunga. The regret for me is maybe I should have gone and dropped by more often and tried to work on him. Anil tells me that that work is not yet complete. I hope Anil, you and other friends can somehow put it together, because what you have there will be invaluable. So a big loss for us. For me, a personal loss, because for me he was my editor emeritus for a long time. He was like a family physician who you inherit from your parents. You could go and tell all your family secrets, including kahan pet mein dard ho raha hai, to kal raat ko kya khaya tha aur kya kiya tha. And to that extent, he's a loss for me, he's a loss for the family. I know he's a loss to all his friends. But I think the best tribute now is to somehow put together that memoir. And I would request the Express, I don't know if anybody is here from the Express, to put together his writings in a book, particularly on the 60s, which I still believe was the most important decade in India's history.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I guess that brings us to an end. There will be tea and some snacks served downstairs, so if you would like to go downstairs and start mingling and chatting and probably discussing the stories, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
All the girls in the office, you could talk to the gentleman. अपनी बात करिए वो अपनी बात
अभी क्यों करूँ?
ecco, tempo per il giorno.